The Pest and Predator podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm. Really looking forward to this episode of the Pest and Predator podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Tyler Wist of AAFC Saskatoon. And we're going to be talking about a number of things related to beneficial insects. And in particular, we're talking about green lacewings and aphid milkshakes. That's right, aphid milkshakes. Tyler, what do you mean by aphid milkshakes?
Well, I just love the title of this talk that we put together, Aphid Milkshakes, Green Lacewings Fave. So when I'm giving talks and I'm talking about the feeding mode of these green lacewings, I always bring up the term aphid milkshakes because it's something that people can relate to. You've had a milkshake before, I'm sure. You're drinking it through a straw. You're sucking up this. It's thick, right? And so that's kind of what I'm getting at with the aphid milkshakes. And so aphids are one of the preferred foods of the green lacewing larvae. And so this green lacewing larvae, he's got, or she's got, these huge sickle-shaped mandibles. And they look like two scimitars. And when they come together, they just poke into the side of the aphid. And you're kind of looking at this thing going, what are you doing? What are you doing there? And these sickle-shaped mandibles, they're hollow. And they are injecting a digestive enzyme into that aphid, which does what a digestive enzyme does. It digests the aphid. And so you get kind of an aphid slurry that is now getting sucked out through those hollow mandibles. And so this green lacewing larva basically turns the aphid into a milkshake. Maybe milk isn't the right term. Probably a slurry of dead aphid babies because, of course, aphids give birth to live young. So they've got aphids inside of them. That and all of the sugar that they've been eating. So, well, maybe milkshake is the right term because milkshakes are kind of loaded with sugar, aren't they? So they're sitting there and they are sucking the insides out of these aphids and they just leave this aphid husk behind. So they're kind of a messy feeder. They leave the outer cuticle of the aphid behind and then they move on to the next one. So that's what I mean by aphid milkshakes.
So they essentially suck them dry? Is that the visual you should have?
That is perfect. Sucking them dry. Yeah. And you can actually watch the aphid kind of shrinking like a balloon that's having the air sucked out of it.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah.
That is, with all of these, I'm always so just blown away by the coolness of some of this, and to be able to watch this under a microscope would be phenomenal. So is there just one species of this lacewing?
There are a few species around our neighborhoods. We get the common green lacewing, and that one's Chrysoperla carnea, the scientific name. We also get the golden-eyed lacewing, and that one is Chrysopa oculata. So they're actually in two different genus, but yeah, they both do about the same kind of damage. The common one, though, it's actually bred in captivity, and so if you have a hankering to see this thing on your own, you can order your own green lacewing larvae, and we've done that in the past. And we had battles of green lacewing versus aphids, but also against ladybug larvae. So when we pit those two up together, I'll tell you, you always bet on the green lacewing larva. Don't bet on those ladybugs. So they have two different modes of feeding. So the ladybug larva, it likes to chew, and but when that green lacewing gets a hold of it and gets those mandibles into the ladybug larva, it's game over. So same thing, digest them from the inside out, and they leave a little ladybug husk behind. So lots of fun there.
What's the size of these lacewing?
So we're talking just a few millimeters. They're not huge. They start out really small, and they'll go through 3 larval instars. So every time they shed their skin, they get bigger. That's what happens when you wear your skeleton on the outside. You have to let it go so you can grow. And by the time they get to their 3rd instar, they're not hugely big. If you know the size of an aphid, it's probably 4 or 5 aphid lengths.
That's incredible. Okay, so in my research for this, I also read about aphid lions. So talk about that and where that fits into this.
Yeah, so that's a nickname for those larvae of the green lacewings. Now, they've got a perfectly good common name, green lacewing, but that relates more to the adult form. So when you're looking at the adult and you look at their wings look lacy. And so they're in the order Neuroptera, which means netted wing. And so or like neural wings, so it's like a neural pathway on their wings. But of course, when you're a larva, you don't have wings yet. So they call these things aphid lions, and that is just because of their voracity, like how they go after an aphid. So they'll spot the aphid and they start running towards it, and then they spear it with their mandibles. And I've seen this. They will shake the aphid above their head like a lion might do to kill its prey. So hence the name aphid lions for these larvae.
So very aggressive. So
very aggressive.
In terms of the ratio, or in terms of like how many aphids can one aphid lion or lacewing eat in a given time?
Yeah, and so because you can order green lacewing, the common green lacewing larvae, people have done quite a few studies on these. Often they'll pit the lacewing larva up against a bunch of different species of aphid. And so it depends on the size of the aphid, depends on the species of aphid as well. And it also depends on the size of the green lacewing larva. So when they start out, they're small, and they'll eat around 12 aphids per day in their first instar. Then they up the kill rate to about 16 around there in their second instar. And then the real killer stage is that third instar, when they can eat their body weight in aphids in a day. They've been recorded to kill anywhere from 100 to 250 aphids per day, depending on their size and the aphid species. So an excellent field hero, an excellent beneficial predator. And this is one that I've worked into the Cereal Aphid Manager app that you can get on in the Google Play Store or in the Apple Store. And so it'll help you scout cereal aphids, but it also works in the voracity or the kill rate of things like the green lacewing larva that you might find in the field. And I do find them in the field. So one of my favorite stories was I was teaching the field course, and we found a green lacewing larva, and I was holding it in my hand, and this thing bit me. And I thought that was super cool. So I watched it for a while, and then it started to sting. And so I was like, oh, you're injecting me with digestive enzymes, and maybe I'm going to stop this little experiment. And it stung for about an hour afterwards, but
really,
lots of fun.
Taken on a human, though, it's hard to suck you dry, as we've used in the analogy. So, do they?
That's right.
They're obviously aggressive. Like you were stung by one. Besides humans, do they eat anything else but aphids?
Yeah, they'll eat any soft-bodied insect. So I talked about them going after the lady beetle larvae. Yeah, they'll go after anything that's out there. So I was feeding them cabbage loopers because we've got a colony of cabbage loopers, and I sat there for about an hour and watched this thing drain the cabbage looper. It took about an hour, but it went from a nice fat-looking cabbage looper that was about the same size as this green lacewing larva, and yeah, it was just a shriveled husk by the time it was done feeding. So anything that's soft-bodied, anything they can get their mandibles on, and insect eggs. So one of the ways that you can raise these green lacewing in captivity is by feeding them the eggs of the rice leaf moth, and that's sort of the established protocol for how you rear these things in a lab.
Now, I Googled the lacewing, and some of the pictures I saw were of their eggs, and they look kind of almost like alien-like on top of like little stalks. What is that about?
you you just triggered my Google, and it's talking. That was super funny. All right. So we're talking eggs of the lacewing. Now, yeah, they look very alien, and they're up on these little stalks, aren't they? And often when you see them, they're hanging down from the underside of a leaf. So we were talking about, do they eat anything else but aphids? Yeah, they'll eat their own brothers and sisters, and they'll eat their own siblings' eggs. And so the mother green lacewing lays them on these stalks, and often on the underside of a leaf, so that when those first instars hatch out, they just drop down and they can't get back up to eat their brothers and sisters before they come out of the eggs or as they're coming out of the eggs. So, yeah, not too scrupulous, those green lacewing larvae.
When I think of beneficial insects, for whatever reason in my mind, I think of like a laid back, almost like a Venus flytrap, or just, stationary, sits there, and once in a while it has some sort of collection on the insect it's trying to be a predator on. But these are like the barracudas, piranhas, like they're in full attack mode.
Full attack mode. They're out there hunting. You're kind of describing a praying mantis. This is what I thought the praying mantis would be until I got the praying mantis. But they just sit around and they wait for something to walk in front of them. And if nothing comes by, they wind up starving, it looks like. So, yeah, I mean, they're fun when you wave a larva in front of their face. But these green lacewing larvae, they are active hunters. They're out there. They are looking, and they're hungry.
So obviously we're trying to protect them as beneficial insects, like we are with many beneficial insects. How do growers go about making sure that we're encouraging the population of these lacewing instead of being a bit of a detriment to them?
Well, if you're out in your crop with a sweep net, you know that you've got a green lacewing adult in there without even having to open up your sweep net, because they release a really noxious smelling chemical because they don't like being in sweep nets, and they're trying to keep you from eating them. And so far it's worked, because I've never eaten a green lacewing adult before. So if you're out there and you're sweeping your field and you see a bunch of these net-like winged insects, and they are green, they're a nice bright green, and and your sweep net stinks, be like, hey, you know what? I've got some green lacewing. I've got some beneficial insects here. Let's leave them alone and use those economic thresholds on whatever insect you are scouting for in your fields. And if you haven't reached those thresholds, just leave that field alone. Let those green lacewing adults lay eggs and let the larvae do their thing in your field. But also in those natural areas, kind of beside the field, where you've got aphids on other things that are not your crop. And I'm talking different species of aphid that are never going to get into the crop. Aphids are very host specific. They're a much better plant taxonomist than I am. The green lacewing larvae, their populations on the margins can build up as well on these alternate food sources like other aphids. Leave those alone as well.
When I heard about these aphid milkshakes, I was thinking we were going to talk about alternative protein sources for your people's workout regimes, but clearly not. We've been talking today to Dr. Tyler Wist. He's a research scientist in the Field Crop Entomology Department at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Saskatoon. Tyler, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Pest and Predator podcast.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Sean. Much appreciated.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pest and Predator podcast. It's brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm.